wasn't the sound I expected to hear. It was a really weird sound. I had been prepared for a lot of things. I thought I would hear something like water. I thought maybe I would hear a door slam, and I expected to hear some cursing. But what I was hearing was this really weird little squeaking sound. Isaac, more squeaking. Isaac, I'm coming in there if you don't answer me. And for the first time in my career, I went into the boys' bathroom. And I couldn't see him. And I pushed open the stall door, and it was super heavy. And there on the back of the door was Isaac. And his backpack strap was wrapped around his neck. And he was terrified. His face was turning red. His eyes had busted blood vessels in them. And I grabbed him, and he was only 8 years old. And I picked him up and ran to the classroom, screaming, "Call 911, call 911. And I was tearing the backpack away from him. And he looked at me, and he could barely talk. And he said, "I wanted to die, but I heard your voice." Isaac's life wasn't easy. It was valuable. When an 8-year-old attempts suicide, we've got a problem. And to hear the statistics and to know where our children are, where many of our children are, we have to take a stand, and we have to use our voice. And so today I'm going to talk with you a little bit about how we can use our voice, a little bit about social emotional learning, and a lot about my kids. Now, I have a different journey into teaching, and this is the part where I should get behind the podium so y'all don't throw things. I didn't start out as a teacher. I was an Army brat, yay for the Army brats, move number 49 just completed. I grew up all over the country and whatnot. Born in Providence, Rhode Island. Actually, Woonsocket radar station. Thank you. And moved to Germany when I was 6 months old. All that good stuff. And so I had an advantage to live in lots of different places and meet lots of different people and to always be the outsider, but always be the insider. Military bases are like that. And anyway, among the other things that I had the privilege of doing, I grew up in a very education-driven family, and I'm the black sheep of the family for a wide range of reasons, but mostly because I don't have a degree in science. I went the other route, and I have a degree in political philosophy with a minor in straight philosophy and another minor in psychology. And I went into law school, and I was a practicing attorney for about 6 years. And I went into law thinking I was going to change the world for kids, and that's actually not possible, in my opinion, through the law. And I'll tell you, and believe me, I'm all about policy and law, it's what I do. But I would go into the courtroom, and when I did my job really well, I was usually tearing a family apart, or sometimes I was putting a child back into a situation where I knew bad things were going to happen to them because that was the law. So as things went, I met my amazing husband, and he had 2 very young children from a previous relationship. They were 3 and 5, and we wound up getting emergency custody of them, and I went from, hey, aren't those kids interesting, to I am now the full-time mom of 2 children, one of whom is special needs, and the other we found out was first-order gifted. And so I started volunteering in the classroom in Rio Rancho, New Mexico, and I loved it, like a lot. And I started rescheduling hearings so that I could be there for Volunteer Wednesdays, and I realized a change needed to happen, so I went into a transition to teaching program at the University of New Mexico. And it was a 17-month program, and you spent 6 months as an apprentice taught summer school, and then for a year you were an intern, and other teachers came into your classroom and helped you teach. So that's kind of where the trouble started. I was noticing things that weren't right, and I said something about them. I did. Eventually, I was given a letter that stated that I was not to speak to any other staff members. Because I was saying things like, why are those kids over there by themselves all the time? How come they can't come to electives with us? And why do I have to turn in this paperwork? That's weird. Anyway, probably shouldn't have said that because somebody probably recorded it and now somebody's mad. But anyway, I went on to teach. I got a fabulous job teaching at the school across the street from my house, so I was living in the neighborhood with the kids. And the neighborhood was very diverse. Albuquerque is about a third Native American, a third Anglo, and a third Hispanic Latino. And so it was a very diverse neighborhood, and economically it was fairly diverse. The side of the highway I live on is pretty much all cops and teachers. My husband was a cop, I was a teacher. It's that kind of a neighborhood, plumbers, kind of a nice middle-class neighborhood. The other side of the highway is pretty rough. And we have a lot of kids from that side of the highway. We also got kids from the Canyoncito Reservation, or Tahajali Reservation. Nobody from Tahajali? Oh, shocking. And anyway, so it really gave me a great opportunity to work with kids. And I started at general ed, and I noticed this group of kids walking around, and they were literally, again, always by themselves. And I thought that was so strange. And so I finally went over and asked the teacher, I said, what's the deal with those kids? How come your class is always, like, there's only 9 kids and they go to all their electives by themselves? Because see, when I was a kid, special ed kids didn't come to the school with the rest of us. The special needs kids were somewhere else. And so I truly didn't know, like, what the deal was. Anyway, she and I became great friends. Her class and my class started working together and collaborating. And a few years later, I found myself dual certified, national board certified in exceptional needs. Yay, national boards. Yeah, I know. And I started working with the interesting children. And to get into my program, the last couple of years I was in school, you had to have been in a psychiatric hospital for at least a year, and you had to have been arrested or involved in the justice system at least once, usually for a felony, and I taught 3rd, 4th, and 5th grade. So I love my guys. I really love my guys. But we didn't talk about social emotional learning, but I'm going to tell you we lived it. We lived it every day. And I wish I could tell you that Isaac's attempt was his only attempt. He actually made, attempts at least 3 times that year that I know of. That was the worst of them. I remember the day he laid down in front of the wheels of the school bus during dismissal, hoping that the bus would run him over so he didn't have to go home. Another time he tried to overdose on pills, but we took him away and whatnot. Anyway, we talked a lot about what you can do instead. And we talked a lot about emotional skills with children. I didn't have an SEL curriculum, but we were living that as that was our primary focus in life, was what can you do instead of violence? What can you do instead of cursing someone out? What can you do instead of joining the gang, drugs, etc.? And we would have a lot of these conversations, and I learned so much from those guys. And I say guys because I had, over the course of the 5 years I had that program, I had 2 females in my class. Girls, by the way, tend to almost never be identified for emotional disorders early because they tend to be more inwardly facing and self-destructive than disrupting the classroom, and so they don't get kicked out of school quite as often and get involved in these kinds of programs until much later. But anyway, that's a little bit about my background and the things I was doing. with these kids. And because of all that, and because I'm agreeing, if you were at Dr. Harmon's session yesterday, I started really obsessing about social emotional learning and how we can bring it into the curriculum. So I made a PowerPoint last night because I was freaking out because y'all were going to be looking at me and stuff. And anyway, this is from castle.org, and the program says I'm going to be sharing resources, so I'm going to tell you go to castle.org. They have a fabulous, fabulous set of resources that walk you through social emotional learning, but better yet, the Friday Institute, write it down if you don't know it, the Friday Institute is going to be offering a course that leads to micro-credentialing this fall around social emotional learning. It's a free open source resource, so the Friday Institute would be great, and it's based a lot on the castle.org in action. But it's really, to me, it's the stuff that holds us together as a society. It's the stuff that makes us a community. It's me talking to you, me looking around the room and knowing what's going on. And as teachers, as accomplished teachers, we're masters of this. You can look across the room and know this one had a bad day, this one had a great day, this one's got a date tonight, whatever the case may be. But what we're not masters about is vocalizing and verbalizing those, and really incorporating it into our thought process, both in the classroom and out of the classroom. And I will tell you, some of the most messed up relationships and sets of social emotional skills occur in the hallways and in the teacher's lounge. I may or may not have once challenged the entire second grade to something. It wasn't a fight. I actually challenged them all to switch and teach fourth grade for a year. They wouldn't do it. But anyway, these are the things that we're going to be that we're looking for, and I think these are things that everybody can agree are important. And when you talk to employers, these are the things that they want their children, their students, their future workers to be good at. Rarely do you hear somebody terminated because they didn't know how to fill out Form 182 FB. It's because they couldn't get along with their coworkers. It's because they didn't have an original idea. It's because the way they expressed anger or had difficult conversations was unacceptable to the people in the room. And so when we're teaching these skills, in some cases we're teaching survival. For some of our children, it is literally, am I going to be alive tomorrow? For others, it's, am I going to have a job? Am I going to have a successful relationship? Am I going to, be able to achieve my dreams? So it's a little frightening to me that SEL is one of the hot things right now, because I have this impression in my head that somebody's going to come walking into a school building with a set of books. They're like, this is the SEL curriculum. Let's teach the children how to behave. Which maybe it would be wonderful and fabulous, but in order to teach SEL in a responsible way, in order to be good at it, you have to know your students and you have to be committed to their learning. Oh, good, there it is. These are the CASEL 5 core competencies. When you go to their website, it will walk you through each of these things with some suggested activities, what it looks like, how it sounds, how you can talk about it. But these are the things that I lived in my classroom with my kids quite often. Self-awareness. You need to know when you're so angry you're about to pop off and hit somebody. You need to know when you're so depressed you're about to go in the bathroom and try to hang yourself on your backpack. Self-management. Impulse control, those types of things, that responsible decision making. You can see how all of these apply to students all the way through. Now, where I got excited the first time I saw these is for NBCTs, 5 is sort of a magic number. Oh, look at that. 5 competencies, 5 core propositions. When I was a teacher, I was really good. When I became an NBCT, I became world class. And I will say to anyone that I offered the kids in my class the best education they could get every single day once I became an NBCT. And I usually try to keep my teacher self out because teachers are really nice. and positive and great. My inner attorney is not so nice and not so great. And I will tell you, never once in my career as an attorney did anybody come up to me and say, I'd like to get joined in on this hearing today. I've never passed the bar, but I'm just as good as someone who did. And I'm not trying to be offensive. It actually leads to a professional mindset. And give me a little bit of grace and indulgence with this. I know not everybody's board certified. For some people, it's not the right path, but what I do know is becoming board certified for me did a couple of things. First of all, it gave me the confidence to face my classroom and my students every day, and to be able to have children go through unspeakable tragedy and do unspeakable things to themselves, and wake up and know I gave them the very best I had to give. I gave them the very best any teacher anywhere could give. And be able to, it kept me resilient to be able to go back in the classroom. The other thing it did for me, and I'm not gonna lie, I got a huge raise in New Mexico when I became board certified. Any New Mexicans in the house? Yeah. It worked out to a $15,000 raise when I got board certified, so giddy up, I did it for the money. I did. When I was an attorney, I never once apologized to a client for saying, if you'd like to come in and speak with me, that'll be a $1,250 retainer. My rate is $275 an hour, and if you'd like me to write a letter for you, that's going to be at least $600. Imagine what I could get for billables on an IEP. By the way, I write. But as teachers, as educators, I learned really quickly that that's not how we roll. You don't walk into a teacher's lounge and go like, I'm better than you, and I'm better than you, and I'm smarter than you, and I could kick your tail on a briefing. Teachers are nice, so I learned to be nice. And for me, nice was problematic, because I know how to push a point. I know how to argue a case. I will find the research, and I will drive you into the ground with points of data. Richard knows I can be a little dogmatic. But it's hard to do that in education. But what drives you is when you think about your students and you have to get there. And we have to find a way, in SEL, learning those social emotional skills is something that we as educators need to get a lot better about among ourselves. Because we have to have these difficult conversations. And it's not okay when somebody in your staff says, I don't want those behavior kids coming to the library with my kids because they're gonna mess up the library, or because they're crazy, or I don't want those kids bringing their native dirtiness into my classroom. And you nicely sit there and go, okay. Like, it's not okay. You have to have those difficult conversations. You have to be able to go, excuse me. First of all, federal law IDA requires that my students be in their least restrictive environment, and they are in fact entitled by law to be in the library, and no general education student actually has a legally defined right to be there. So back off and let my kids come into this room before I bring a student. Now, I learned to say it a little more nicely than that, because the first couple of times you smack a full brief down on your principal's desk, she pulls you aside and says, Michelle, let's try to get, let's get a little bit nicer about this. There might not be an I in team, but there is an I in policy. And no matter where you are on the political spectrum, no matter how you want to be engaged or don't want to be engaged, policy affects you. And as educators, you have this amazing superpower that we don't use enough with our policymakers. See, you can teach them. And sometimes I joke and say, well, people say, oh, the National Board must have hired you to do the policy work because you were an attorney. And I'm like, well, yeah, it's not very intelligent. But actually, I think that the National Board may have hired me because I was a special educator, and I can teach and reteach a fact 87 different ways until you get it. And that comes in really handy with legislators sometimes. You don't have to go to Capitol Hill or march in a rally or write legislation in order to be part of the policy conversation. But you have to be informed, and you have to be engaged, and you have to know how to have those difficult conversations on behalf of your students. And I know I'm switching back and forth about policy and SEL, but somebody is going to be writing policy about the curriculum in your school, and somebody is going to be writing funding policy, and you as the expert need to be there to say, this is why it's important that we have electives in our school, so that our students have an opportunity to touch into the things that are good, the things that revive their soul, the things that bring them hope and joy, and the things that keep them off the back of the bathroom stall door with a backpack wrapped around their neck. And you are the only ones who can tell their stories. You are the ones who can make those impressions. Write newspaper editorials. Invite a legislator into your classroom. It doesn't have to be a big rally. It doesn't have to be a big march. Bring a legislator into your classroom to see what the conditions are to meet your students. Tell them there's going to be a camera there. That always helps. But that is policy, that is advocacy. And it's also showing a form of social emotional learning, because your students are seeing how to interact with different people, how to engage in conversations. Imagine, small children, high school children, talking to someone about what's important to their school and why their school might need more funds, or why lunches should be free for every child in this country. Now, making connections is very, very difficult. I don't know if I would have ever heard of this guy, despite the fact that he built some amazing bridges, the George Washington, Manhattan bridges, the Brooklyn Bridge. Anybody here from Washington State? Tacoma Narrows Bridge. You know where this is going, don't you? We have a little video of the bridge that he is most famous for. Oh, here it goes. This part always makes me a little nauseous. He built this beautiful bridge across a beautiful span in Washington State, but there was a problem. It was so well designed for the wind that it thought it was an airplane wing. And he's trying to connect one side to the other, and they spent millions and millions of dollars on it, and look at it go. Things are not going well in the Tacoma Narrows. And it continues to buckle and bend, and it eventually breaks. And there was a car left on it, and it was a gentleman who was actually there to film the bridge, because it had gotten to be kind of a thing to go see Galloping Gertie. And so this is how they captured it on film. And the part that always gets to me is that there was a little doggy in the car. The way I tell the story, the dog gets out. So that's what I believe to be true. But when you're having these conversations, when you're having these building connections with legislators, building connections with people who don't look like you, building connections with students who may curse and swear or wear those weird baggy pants, or all the things are different than you. I promise you, it's probably going to be less Golden Gate Bridge and more Tacoma Narrows. And the foundations need to be solid. And we can go ahead and stop here on this one, because eventually it falls all apart and crashes into the water. But the interesting thing, you can still get from one side of the Tacoma Narrows to the other, because you know what they did? They built another bridge. They built a better one. They made it a little bit stronger. So the lessons I take from the Tacoma Narrows Bridge are, first of all, you can do some amazing and great work, and you may be most famous for your biggest failure. And I always feel kind of bad for this guy, because I'm perpetuating that he's famous for his biggest failure. But you know what? I'd rather be famous for a big failure and know I did 10 solid pieces of work, because I'm green, and I don't really care what people are saying about my failures. It's important that I know that the bridges were built and that the connections were made. Now, some bridges absolutely have to be crossed. Who knows where this bridge is? We've seen it at least 5 times at this conference. It is, I would say, the most important bridge in America. Yes, ma'am. Bloody Sunday. Who would think that crossing a bridge would have resulted in so much death, pain, and destruction, hatred, healing, and progress. And when I look at the folks on this bridge who are celebrating, this was the 50th anniversary, and we see the Obamas, the Bushes, survivors of Bloody Sunday, many of the amazing heroes holding hands and crossing the bridge together. I know Melissa Collins' students crossed this bridge. This is social emotional learning. This is education. Like Tacoma Narrows, it can be difficult and hard, and sometimes it's going to crash. But other times, we're going to keep crossing until we make the connection that can't be broken. We find it really hard to deal with the tone of voice that people say. How many of you have ever been told you need to watch your tone? Okay? My teaching partner for many years, when we taught inclusion for about 10 years in the same classroom, she was Thai. Her mother was from Thailand. And she was constantly being told, you need to watch your tone. I will tell you that didn't generate a great response from her because her tone would just amp up a little bit. But like, your tone, the way that you're saying things is so offensive to me, I won't even listen to you. And what that actually sounds like to me is somebody saying, your truth is hurting my ears, so I don't want to listen to it anymore. So please say it the way that I like it to be said. Please take your time and make it palatable to me. Okay? I didn't like it when my students would come in, or their parents would come in, and they would be all ganged out and flipping signs. But if I had said, stop, I'm not going to have this IEP until you come back dressed appropriately, those kids wouldn't have gotten the help that they needed. If I went into a legislator's office and said, hi, I'd really like to talk to you, I'm just a teacher. I think it'd be really great if we had some funding. That would be awesome. I'm not going to make any progress. I will say I spent a lot of time watching people speak. This has been just such an amazing conference, but my husband gets really annoyed because I will sometimes replay a speech over and over to hear the phrasing, to hear how did he peak his voice just like that. It's a skill that can be taught, it's a skill that can be learned. But there's a social emotional aspect to that interaction and going back and forth with people. The skill I'm hoping that you take away from this is think about your tone, think about what's going to be effective, the way you deliver any other lesson, but also know that sometimes you have to be a little grating. Sometimes you're going to have to push it just a little bit in order to get your point across. Oh, notifications. Yay for tweeters. I was trying to see how much time I have left. Anyway. Oh no, I gotta go back. Can we go? Yeah, there we go. If I look at this picture, I will tell you, if I look at this picture, I probably wouldn't want to listen to this guy's music. I try to pretend like I'm all that and all cool, but I'm not. I'm much more happy with, some like chill music. But this is a guy named Superman, and he is from the Crow Reservation. And after his brother and his father committed suicide, he wrote some amazing music. And to be respectful for the time, I'm not going to play the video. I implore you to look up Superman and watch his videos. And I will say, I love the fact that he includes in his video about how to change the world. His lyrics include, why don't teachers make more than professional athletes? I just like this video because it's cool, because he bungee jumps and there's an alligator down there. Sometimes your solution is not going to be all you hope it's going to be. And don't you hope those bungee cords are really strong? Build strong connections with your students, with your policymakers. I know it's really cool. And this is a puppy because puppies! For those of you who know me, this is not Yogi. Yogi would eat the suitcase and throw it around. I put this in here to remind you to take time to hear and refine your inner voice. It's okay to not be an activist 24/7, 365. We'll give you 15 minutes to recharge yourself, so you can only do it 24/7, 23. Anyway, I'm going to try something here, and y'all go with me because you're cool. This is the stance I find most comfortable for educators. Stand up with me and go, I don't know what I can do with those kids. I don't know. Now we're going to do something really uncomfortable, and people are going to tell us to watch our tone. Repeat after me. It feels so weird to take up space, to own it, to celebrate it. You can put your hands down now. Our children need us. We need to be repeating with them, for them, early and often. But I'm going to tell you the part that keeps me from doing this every day. A couple of years ago, I got a phone call, and it was collect from the detention center. That's never a good thing. I knew where both my kids were. It was Isaac. And Isaac had been convicted of felony murder. He was still underage at the time, and so he was at the D home, the juvenile facility, and it was his last day at the D home, and he was going to the big house. He was going to do at least 20 years with good time. And he called me and he said, "Ms. Accardi, I just needed to hear your voice. Speak for your students. Talk with them. Talk for them. Talk to each other. Thank you so, so much. If I can ever be of any service, please throw up the bat signal. I'm M. Accardi, one. The other one is like a really famous software engineer. I can't solve your software problems. M. Accardi, one at NBPTS. Thank you so much for everything that you do on behalf of all your students, on behalf of Isaac. Have an amazing rest of your conference and a wonderful